Hello, everyone. My name is John Wu. My mentor on this project was Brian. I'm currently recording this from Palos Verdes Estates, California, and here's my presentation: The Collapse of the American Dream, from Rags to Riches to the Ragged and the Rich. I like to open this talk with a quote that I believe encapsulates why this research is so important. Knowledge is power. Information is liberating. Education is the premise of progress in every society, in every family. Kofi Annan. Information brings about progress, and I believe when people are armed with accurate, relevant knowledge, it allows for effective policy implementation and great positive change. In this main case, social mobility is a key tenet of the American dream that we in the US hold in very high regard. Yet, over the years, it seems to have deteriorated. This research was done to examine how the promise of a better life and equal opportunity for all has evolved over the years, and to see how we can learn from others to improve our own country. My main focus is on measuring how minimizing economic inequality can increase social stability and well-being, as well as knowing what contributes to vertical social mobility to help guide policies to restore the American dream and help with the country's key issues. Here are some key terms that you should know in order to better understand the presentation. Index, values scale from base x equals 100. It's a term very common to represent change ratio. So, for example, if something in 1980 cost $20 and something in 2020 costs $40, if we assigned 1980 to be the base for the index, then 1980 would correspond to 100, and 2020 would correspond to 200, because it's now in 2020 is now worth twice as much as it was worth in 1980. Real dollars is a way of saying inflation-adjusted dollars. So it's a way of measuring the value of money over time, the real value. It's very common in time series. So whenever I say real dollars, I'm saying it's already CPI adjusted or inflation adjusted. The linear model is a regression creating a straight line model based on least error, also known as residuals. In our study, it's backward selected, which means we're taking out the most statistically insignificant variables and rerunning the model until we're left with only those significant on a 0.05 level to give us the best explainability. Multilinear model is very similar, yet with multiple x variables, and each variable's coefficient tells the individual effect when all other variables are held constant. R squared tells us the amount of variance in observed data points that are being accounted for and explained in the model, where higher is better and goes from 0 to 1. P-value is an indicator of statistical significance, where lower is better, and lower than a 0.05 represents a 95% confidence that the true value is statistically significant. Lasso, relaxed lasso, tree, random forest, and XGBoost are all other model methods that are a bit more complicated in the linear model. But while I don't need to know how they work in order for you to understand this presentation, I want to go over them so you know what I'm talking about very briefly. Lasso is a regression method based off of penalizing statistically insignificant variables. Relaxed lasso is where you take those variables that are left behind after lasso and run them through a linear model, where it's a different model now because you're basing it off of least error instead of based on penalizing. The tree is a common model where you use a series of if-then rules to generate predictions. Random forest is a commonly used machine learning algorithm that combines output of multiple trees to reach a single, stronger model, usually with a method called bagging that minimizes overfitting and variance. XGBoost stands for extreme gradient boosting, another machine learning algorithm that also uses multiple decision trees, and their process called pruning helps to minimize underfitting and bias to create a stronger model. Here's a methodology, basically how I got the data, took it, and created the analysis. So first, I found multiple data sets from various sources to cast a wide net in order to see what variables would affect our response variables. Then through EDA, which is exploratory data analysis, I basically joined them together, applied variables to visualize some correlations to help me learn more about the topic itself, and created a subset of non-any observations, basically rows that every variable had a value. I did this because many models required data sets that had completely filled out variables. And from there, I split into testing and training data, which I'll get into later. And also applied a log transformation to GDP per capita, which you'll also see. I created LM, Lasso, LM is the linear model, Lasso, Lasso, tree, random forest, and XGBoost models for social mobility index, poverty rate, and GDP per capita, which those are our three response variables. And finally, model selection prediction, where we select the predictive models based off testing error, which, as mentioned earlier, is based off where you treat a small subset of the training data designated as testing data. You train your model based off the training data, and then run it through the testing data to find the total error, see how good your model is. And we also chose the model based on explainability and overall model significance. So you mentioned you remember mentioning earlier that I applied a log transformation to the GDP per capita. Why did I do that? You can see here that we have two density plots. On the left is one where I did not apply log transformation. On the right, where I did. You can see on the left, it's very skewed. GDP per capita in general just tends to be kind of polarizing, where there's some of them very, very high. Most of them are stuck around this lower level. However, if you put a log transformation, we help the variance conform to normality, which is one of the three assumptions of a linear model. And so it's very important for us to make the model valid and more reasonable. So you can see here, when we put a log transformation, the bell curve, the data helps fit the bell curve better. Okay, moving on to US data, or us analyzing the current US state, analyzing how the American regime has changed over time. So here are the variables we use in kind of analyzing how the American dream has evolved. Median income, median care of monthly premiums, tuition fees, house price, share of wealth of top 1% versus bottom 50%, Gini index, percentage of or more than their parents, and savings after necessary expenditures. Below them are the sources. FRED is the Federal Reserve Bank Economic Data, and CES is the National Center of Economic Statistics. Gini index, some of you might not be familiar with. The Gini index runs from 0 to 100, where 0 is a measure of economic inequality. 0 is perfect equality, 100 is perfect inequality, where lower values preferred. And here we have our first graph, expenditures, which are already real dollars, so CPI adjusted, and index is 1984, meaning that 1984 is where all values equal to 100. First thing jumped out to you, boom, orange, healthcare premium index. As you can see, even though it's already been inflation adjusted, it's going to over 400%, or 4 times the original amount it cost in 1984. You can also see tuition index. So tuition fees have also grown to around 225% of their cost in 1984, even after adjusting for inflation. So it shows the cost of living has really gone up by a lot. And out of all these, median income has gone up the least. It's grown the slowest. So we can see that there's a big cost of living growth while there's some strong wage stagnation. Here we have percentage shows the passenger father's income. So the key here might be a little bit confusing, but I'll explain it. FD represents father-daughter pair. FS represents father-son pair. The P and the number represents the percentile that the father's income was in. So FSP 50 would mean a father-son pair where the father's income was in a 50 percentile. So as you can see, for the father-son pairs, which are at the top, most of them had a very high chance or a very high percent of them surpassing the father's income if they were born in 1940. But as years went on, we can see that it started around 90%. In 1980, past that, around 1984, they went down to around 50%, 4%, 30%. So basically, the intergenerational vertical mobility has gone down by a lot. We can also see that the father-daughter pairs, the only one that did not go down was the father-daughter percentile 25 children. So most women had their percent of them surpassing the father's income actually go down, which is already very low. You see around 25%, go down maybe 20%, 10%, which is, you can see they're already consistently below their male counterparts, which is due to the economic opportunities that most women do not have, the greater economic hardships they face. Next, we have Gini coefficient over time. So as you see the gray bar, that's the time period of Reaganomics implementation. For those of you who don't know, Reaganomics was a set of economic policies set in place by Ronald Reagan, the former president, in which it was called trickle-down economics, where he believed that by cutting the taxes on the rich, it would help boost business and thus help the poor also get more wealth. However, as you can see, as Gini coefficient has actually increased over time since then by quite a lot, and our income inequality has increased even more. So our the share of wealth has become more polarizing. So as you say, as we can see in the next graph, the wealth share percent over time. Again, the gray bar presents Reaganomics implementation. The wealth of the top 1%, so the amount of money that the top 1% of the country owns, started around 22% and then grew to around 30%, which is pretty high, while the wealth of the lower 50% had 4% and went down to around 3%. So this is a very common case, very common saying of saying that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So those trickle economics don't actually work. They actually work in reverse. They had the opposite effect of what was intended. Finally, here we have savings rate over time, where we have the personal savings or the as a ratio of how much you could save after all your necessary expenditures. So a beginning of observations, it peaked around 13%. In 1980, around 10%, and then nowadays around 3%. So it basically tells us that since in the past 4 decades, we've really gone down in the amount of money that we could save. So that means that people trying to save for a house or trying to save in investments like stocks or real estate, they have much less opportunity to do that and build up generational wealth. You can see a big spike here, COVID-19. That was around 2020. So this is pretty obvious, but during quarantine, people cannot really go out and spend their money. So there's a lot more savings being done since you just know how much places to spend it at. There's a very big outlier here. Okay, moving on to global data. To be very clear, this data is completely separate from our US data, which we used previously. That was to explore the American stream status over time. This is modeling prediction based off of other countries. So as I said earlier, poverty, social mobility, GDP per capita are 3 response variables that are being modeled here. Here are the 9 variables we used originally in order to figure out the effects on those 3 response variables. So tuition costs, mortgage as a percent of income, which is median monthly mortgage price. Mortgage price has over median income. Price income ratio, which is very similar but distinct. It is based on apartment price instead of mortgage price. Social welfare is the percent of the total country's GDP that is spent on social welfare services. The top percent income share is similar to what we used earlier. Basically how much of the total income is earned by top percent. The Gini coefficient, instead of running from 0 to 100, now runs from 0 to 1. Higher values are lower values are still preferred, which means that's less uneven or less unequal when you go lower. Education index, it's a quality of education measure for any given country. It was based on the access to education, cultural values, and emphasis on education, as well as economic standing, where higher values are preferred, and it goes from 0 to 1. Corruption perception is a index that ranks countries based on perceived transparency and corruption within the government, where 0 is very corrupt and 100 is very clean, so higher values are preferred. And healthcare index estimation runs from a theoretical minimum of 0 to a theoretical maximum of 100, which evaluates the overall quality and accessibility of healthcare system, including factors such as healthcare professionals, equipment, number of staff, and also out-of-pocket costs. Here are 3 predictive variables. To more in-depth about social mobility index, it's an index created by the World Economic Forum. It's a measure, as the name implies, for the vertical social mobility of a country. It's based off of several measures, which are including but not limited to working conditions, fair wage distribution, how many generations it takes for a low-income household to approach the mean income. The GDP per capita poverty rate also included. I felt that they are very strong indicators of a country's overall prosperity and are also very key topics in debate when regarding social economic policy. So I want to see that, maybe see how different variables that affect social mobility index also affect poverty rate and GDP per capita, and see if we change things to improve social mobility, maybe also change, see what those changes will have effects on the country's prosperity. So as I mentioned earlier, we had to make a subset of non-NA variables, basically subset of where all the data was filled for every variable. So you can see how these are mostly high-income countries. You see in Europe, America, Canada, also one Japan. So we had same limitations. These are only 24 countries. So it was less than expected, but this had to happen due to the fact that our models required them to be fully complete cases. This is an example of some correlation by visualization we did, or I did, that helped to let us understand more about the data, about the insights we could see. So for example, we have one in the middle, Gini coefficient and poverty rate. As the Gini coefficient goes up, as economic inequality goes up, we see poverty rate also tends to go up within countries as well. So if these are obviously not all the variables being plotted against each other, but if you would like to see more, you can feel free to check my GitHub link. And then you can download a program, run it for yourself, and see all the plots there too. Okay, model selection, choosing predictive models. So here is where we look at all the models that we mentioned earlier, comparing them by MSE. So MSE is mean squared error, and this is calculated by running it through the aforementioned testing data. So we took the models that are trained off the training data and ran the testing data, see how big the error was, or the average error. So lower error is obviously preferred. So we chose I chose a linear model for this one. The final ones here. So it's the lowest error. Also links it being linear model, so it's very explainable. Next is the poverty rate model. So we can see all the errors as well. Linear model also was the lowest, so that was chosen. Finally, the log GDP per capita models. While this is based off log GDP per capita models, the error shown here is based off of USD, so it's shown in real USD. So we see that our relaxed lasso is the one that performed the best based off the testing data. Those are the three we were chosen. Now, let's go to analysis of our finally chosen models. So we have social mobility index. So we have the wealth share top 1% and Gini coefficient be negative correlated with social mobility, which means that as you increase wealth share top 1%, or if you increase Gini coefficient while holding all the elements constant, we have a very strong significance that social mobility will go down. And in corruption perception, as you increase the transparency, you make a more clean government, generally social mobility go up. And all these have very low p-values, which means that we have a very high confidence about interval, or a very high confidence that these coefficients are statistically significant. We have a great R squared of 8.856. We can explain around 85% of the variance within the data set through this model. And our overall p-value is very, very small as well. It means this model is very significant. We have these two plots here on the side, our QQ plot and residual plot. So this has to do with the three assumptions of a linear model, which are linearity, normality, and homoscedasticity. So the QQ plot tells us normality, but basically tells us the variance is normally distributed, which is needed for the linear model. And residual plot tells us that this little gray line matching with the dotted line tells us the linearity. Basically tells us that the relationship between the variables can actually be modeled by a linear relationship. And the homoscedasticity is a fancy word for saying like the variability or the residuals are distributed pretty evenly along the data set, as you can see there in the residual plot. Okay, next we have a poverty rate linear model. So healthcare index and wealth share top percent both seem to be positive correlated with poverty rate. So it tells us that as wealth share, the amount of money that wealth share for the top percent owns, then poverty rate tends to go up as well. And healthcare index, so it's kind of unintuitive, but when you hold all these other constant, then healthcare seems to actually increase poverty rate, or doesn't have a very good, or helping with healthcare doesn't really help with poverty rate directly. So this could be also due to the fact that our sample size, our training size is so small, but also could be due to the fact that we're holding the variables constant as well. And finally, welfare spending percent as a GDP, which this is very intuitive. As you spend more money on welfare services, poverty rate will tend to go down. While this welfare spending percent GDP is not significant on 0.05 level, it's very close. It's 0.0518, so extremely close to being 95% confidence. So it's still very important to keep in. We have R squared of 0.53, so we explain around 53% of variance, which is pretty good. And p-value is also very low as well, so this model is also statistically significant. Our QQ plot tells us that the normality is met, and our residual plot tells us that homoscedasticity and linearity are a little bit worse off than our social mobility index model, but it's still fairly well met. Finally, our log GDP per capita relaxed lasso model. So as you can notice from a lasso running, only one variable is left through after running the model, and that was corruption perception, which tells us, number one, GDP per capita is actually very hard to predict, and number two, generally, as corruption perception goes up, so basically as a more clean country, your GDP per capita also has to go up as well. So a more transparent country becomes a more prosperous country. That makes sense. This is very statistically significant, a very, very low p-value. We're very 95% confidence that this value is true. And we have an R squared of 0.62, so we should explain around 60% of the variance with this model. And our p-values are very low, so this model is also very significant. Again, QQ plot, normality is met. Linearity and homoscedasticity are met very well as well. Here we have shown in the residual plot. Next are predictions. So this is a bit different from before. So this is based off of sort of a case study where we want to see how America could change if we change certain variables. So we have original, which are the current real values of America right now. And we have 1, 2, 3, low ball, mid ball, and high ball. These are created first by running the high ball, which is the highest real value observed in all the countries. Then we have the mid ball, which is created by finding the average between the original and the high ball. Then low ball was created by taking the difference between the mid ball and high ball and then subtracting that from the mid ball. You can see all these. So these are the 5 variables that we chose, or I chose after running the models. So these are the models. These are the variables that were left after combining left within combining all the models. So you have corruption perception, coefficient, healthcare index, welfare spending, and income top 1%, the top 1%. So basically healthcare and sort of like income equality, as well as corruption. So here are the results. Dot R represents the real values currently, and dot 1, 2, 3 represent the low ball, mid ball, and high ball, respectively. So, and low and upper represent the lower and upper bounds for the 95% confidence interval. As you see here, if we do a low ball, we can see the SMI is predicted to go down. Social mobility index is going to go down. Poverty rate will tend to go up, and GDP per capita will go down by a lot. So GDP per capita is measured in thousands for the numbers here. And again, this is a low ball. So basically, we're saying America gets a lot worse. We get a lot more uneven equality, healthcare quality, a lot more corrupt, and our economic disparity gets a lot wider. It's important to note for all the GDP per capita predictions that is only based off of one variable, corruption perception. So these tend to be a little bit less accurate when we're based on predictions. Although the explainability was still there. Next, we have the mid-ball, dot 2. So our predicted to have a social mobility increases 8.7 by 8.7, so 78.7. So better social mobility. Poverty rate is predicted to go down, although you can see the confidence interval, it's not entirely, not 9% confidence that, we don't have 9% confidence that it will go down, but it's predicted, it predicted is to go down. And it's also predicted that GDP per capita will go down as well. Again, like I mentioned, the corruption perception is the only one that is the variable predicting this. So it can be a little bit inaccurate since America is kind of special in the fact that it's kind of more corrupt while still being extremely prosperous. It's kind of an outlier here. And finally, dot 3, our high ball. If we make America as best as it possibly could be, really improve a lot. Social mobility skyrockets to 89.4. Poverty rate can go down to 9.1. And our GDP per capita can go up to insane 103.8. We can become very prosperous if we focus on those areas of economic equality, healthcare, and corruption. So, discussion. How can we improve our social mobility? So, first thing is healthcare. Increase funding, government assistance. We can look for lower costs for easier access for healthcare, and less privatization of the country's healthcare, and caps on pharmaceuticals. This is kind of taking advice from a very notable case, Taiwan, who has a very, very good healthcare system where most are covered, almost everyone's covered, while they have still very high quality and wait time, very good wait time. Income share of 1% and Gini. So these both kind of cover the same thing, where we're talking about economic wealth share. So we can fight this with progressive taxation, where we increase more taxation the higher up and wealthy you are, improve or better livable wages, and erasing avoidance loopholes where many rich people can avoid their tax. It's like avoid their huge taxes that are donated to the government. Welfare spending as a percentage of GDP. We can minimize social stigma and administrative hassle to make it easier for people to actually access those services. And we can divert funding and budgets to have more of the funding put into GDP, into welfare. For example, we can cut on other places of the budget. Finally, corruption perception. We want to aim for more transparency in public discussion, better institutional reform. There was big openness regarding spending and lobbying. For example, lobbying for the government to by rich companies and interest groups to put into certain policies. And you might be thinking, well, why should include healthcare? I mean, didn't healthcare have a positive correlation with poverty rate? Well, the thing is, if you remember from earlier, it actually has the 400%, going to 400% of the original cost, which is crazy. From 1984, it's actually gone to 4 times as much. So it's a big thorn in people's sides for cost of living. If they can improve that, we are sure to improve the cost of living situation. Well, as you can see here, that when you don't hold them all constant, you just have the healthcare side by side with social mobility and GDP per capita. Typically, better healthcare services also will increase social mobility and GDP per capita. So here's some limitations we have with this study. So a small training sample size of 24 countries lead to higher error and limited predictive power. The main example of this was welfare spending as a percent of GDP. It was very prominent and very important as a variable. However, it only had 24 countries or so that were actually filled out for the data. So it limited how many we could have in a no any cases subset. We have mostly high income countries that were included within the subset, and it also like those that are outside of large organizations like OECD or NATO, they didn't have much like public information on display, so it was hard to calculate for them. And with more data, we can improve our models for sure by making more accurate, getting more accurate insights, better predictions. And some of the data points are not completely updated with each other. It's only ranged from like 2020 to 2024, so it's actually not a big difference, but it could have effect on the accuracy. What's next? What can we do with this information? It's good to know and all, but what should we do? This basically opens the door for further research into how different government policies can have different real socioeconomic effects, and we want to see how different methods address key issues like social mobility, poverty, and wealth distribution. These are a list of references based off all the data sets that we used. And I want to thank you so much for listening to this. I want to thank you for listening to the presentation, for following along. And overall, I hope this is very helpful to you in your journey to see how economic policies can affect the social mobility of America. And thank you for your time.